College is supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be a place of late-night study sessions, overfilled coffee cups, and the quiet comfort of knowing that hundreds of people are nearby, just one wall away. A place where footsteps in the hallway mean someone's heading to class, where voices through vents mean neighbors laughing, where a sound in the ceiling means nothing more than pipes settling after a long day. That's what students are told. That's what they tell themselves. But safety is often a matter of assumption. And assumptions have a way of dissolving when the environment changes, when the crowd thins, when the lights dim, when the building settles into silence and routine gives way to stillness. Because a campus at night is a different world than a campus at noon. In daylight, buildings feel functional, predictable, transparent. Every hallway leads somewhere. Every door has a purpose. Every sound can be explained. But after hours, those same structures feel altered. Corridors stretch longer than they did before. Rooms feel sealed off from time. Stairwells hold echoes that seem to linger too long, as if reluctant to fade. And in that silence, the smallest disturbance carries weight. A footstep. A knock. A voice. Tonight, you'll hear accounts that were never part of campus tours, never printed in brochures, never discussed during orientation speeches. They weren't shared publicly at the time they happened. Most were only spoken about later, quietly, to friends or family, often with the same disclaimer. I know how this sounds. Because what makes an experience disturbing isn't always what happened. Sometimes it's how precisely it happened. The timing. The repetition. The way events seem to respond, as if awareness itself has become part of the environment. These are not stories about monsters hiding in shadows. They are accounts of something far more unsettling. Situations where nothing visible appears, nothing openly threatens, nothing announces danger, and yet the people who lived through them describe the same feeling afterward. That they were no longer alone. Not in the obvious sense. Not in the way you feel when someone walks into a room. In a different way. A quieter way. The kind of awareness that settles in gradually. The kind that begins with a single unexplained detail and builds until every ordinary sound feels intentional. Every silence feels deliberate. Every empty space feels occupied by something that hasn't revealed itself yet. Behind the scenes, something darker was lurking, something far more dangerous, or so it seemed. And the most unsettling part is this: none of the people you're about to hear from were looking for anything unusual. None of them believed they were stepping into an experience they would later struggle to explain. Each of them began their night the same way countless students do every day, focused on exams, assignments, laundry, messages, routines. Ordinary moments. Ordinary environments. Ordinary expectations. Until something shifted. And once it did, it didn't shift back. Universities are designed with efficiency in mind. Buildings stacked with rooms. Floors layered above one another. Vents connecting spaces that should remain separate. Walls built thin enough to save cost, thick enough to imply privacy. Thousands of lives moving simultaneously through shared architecture. Sound travels in places like this. Through vents. Through ceilings. Through pipes. Through floors. Sometimes you hear laughter from a room you've never entered. Sometimes you hear arguments from strangers you'll never meet. Sometimes you hear footsteps that belong to someone walking home late. But sometimes, the sound doesn't match the structure. Sometimes footsteps come from above when there is no floor above you. Sometimes voices call your name from a place where no one is standing. Sometimes a recording exists of something that hasn't happened yet. And when that happens, logic does what it always does first. It searches. It categorizes. It explains. It tells you there must be a reason, a mechanism, a cause. Because accepting that there might not be one is far more difficult than any explanation, no matter how unlikely. That's why most people ignore the first sign. And the second. And sometimes the third. Not because they aren't afraid, but because they want to remain reasonable. What you're about to hear are 3 documented personal accounts connected by one common element: environment. Each took place on a college campus. Each involved ordinary students with no prior history of unusual experiences. And each followed the same progression. First, a detail that didn't make sense. Then, a pattern. Then, a realization. By the time that realization arrived, it was already too late to dismiss what they had experienced. These stories were never reported publicly. They weren't posted in official records or campus newsletters. They weren't announced in safety briefings or addressed in policy meetings. Instead, they remained where many unsettling experiences remain, inside memory, carried quietly, shared cautiously, and often questioned even by the people who lived through them. But when accounts from different places begin to resemble each other, when separate individuals describe events that follow the same structure, when details align despite distance, time, and circumstance, patterns emerge. And patterns raise questions. Questions about what we assume is empty. Questions about what we assume is silent. Questions about what might be present long before anyone notices it. Because sometimes the campus isn't empty after hours. Sometimes, it's waiting. Universities are environments built for concentration. Designed for repetition. Structured around routine. Students wake at the same time. Walk the same paths. Sit in the same seats. Follow schedules measured down to the minute. Routine creates comfort. But routine also creates expectation. When something disrupts that expectation, even slightly, the mind notices. A sound in the wrong place. A voice at the wrong time. A movement where none should exist. Most of the time, those disruptions are harmless. Buildings shift. Pipes expand. Air pressure changes. Sounds reflect. Most of the time. But every so often, an experience occurs that resists explanation. Not dramatically. Not violently. Quietly. Persistently. With just enough clarity that it cannot be dismissed, and just enough uncertainty that it cannot be understood. Those are the experiences that stay with people. Not because they were loud. Not because they were obvious. But because they felt intentional. Tonight's accounts were collected from students who described events that followed them long after the semester ended. Each story has been preserved exactly as it was told, with identifying details removed for privacy. No embellishment. No exaggeration. Only the events as remembered by the people who experienced them. You may find yourself searching for explanations as you listen. That instinct is natural. It's how the mind protects itself. It prefers a theory, any theory, over uncertainty. But as these accounts unfold, you may notice something else happening. A gradual shift. A realization that explanation becomes harder the further the story goes. And when explanation fades, awareness takes its place. So listen carefully. Because the first story begins in a dorm room at the end of a hallway, on the highest floor of a building where there should have been nothing above it. And yet, something walked there anyway. The building itself wasn't remarkable. It stood at the far end of campus, older than most of the surrounding structures, its brick exterior faded by decades of seasons. The kind of dormitory students are usually assigned during their second year, functional, inexpensive, and slightly worn in ways that suggested long-term use rather than neglect. When he arrived for move-in, nothing about the place suggested anything unusual. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. The walls showed scuffs from years of furniture being pushed through narrow doorways. Overhead lights hummed with a steady electrical tone that blended into the background within minutes. It was ordinary. Completely ordinary. That mattered later. Because when something happens in a place already known for strange occurrences, the mind prepares itself. But when something happens in a place that feels entirely routine, the mind resists that possibility for as long as it can. His room sat at the very end of the hall. Top floor. Last door on the left. He chose it intentionally. Fewer neighbors meant fewer distractions. Less noise. More control over his environment. He liked structure. Predictability. Quiet. The room itself was small but adequate. Bed against the wall. Desk under the window. Closet door that stuck slightly when opened. Ceiling tiles arranged in a grid overhead, faintly stained from old leaks long since repaired. Above that ceiling, according to the building layout, there was nothing. No attic. No crawlspace. No maintenance passage. Just the roof. That detail seemed trivial at the time. A simple architectural fact. One of many small observations made during move-in day and forgotten almost immediately afterward. The first few nights passed without incident. He attended classes. Organized his books. Learned the rhythm of the building. Doors closing. Showers running. Music muffled through walls. Footsteps in the hallway at predictable hours. Dormitories have a language of sound. Residents quickly learn which noises belong. Which noises indicate routine. Which noises can be ignored without a second thought. Within days, he could distinguish the footsteps of the student next door from the pacing of someone across the hall. He could tell when someone dropped a backpack versus when someone set a chair down. Sound mapping is something the brain does automatically. Quietly. Efficiently. It builds a mental blueprint of space using nothing but noise. That blueprint remained stable, until the seventh night. At first, it was faint. So faint he thought it was part of a dream. A soft, measured sound above him. A step. Then another. He opened his eyes and stayed still, listening. Silence returned. He assumed it had come from the hallway. Or the floor below. Or somewhere outside. Buildings carry sound in unexpected ways, especially older ones. Pipes shift. Beams contract. Materials settle as temperatures change. He rolled over and went back to sleep. The next night, it happened again. This time he was awake when it started. 1 step. 2. 3. Slow. Even. Deliberate. He stared at the ceiling. 4. 5. 6. The sound wasn't loud. But it was precise. Too precise to be mistaken for random noise. 7. 8. 9. He sat up. 10. 11. 12. The sound stopped. No shuffle. No turn. No fading. Just, stopped. He waited. Counted silently. Listened for movement in another direction. Nothing. After a minute, he stood on his mattress and pressed his ear against the ceiling tile. Silence. He stepped down and told himself what most people would tell themselves in that moment. It's the building. Old structures produce patterned sounds all the time. Heating systems expand in cycles. Metal ducts cool at steady intervals. Even wind can create rhythmic movement in roof materials. There was always a reason. There had to be. The following night, the sound returned. Same time. Same pace. Same 12 steps. He counted them again to be certain. 1 through 12. Stop. That was the first moment discomfort appeared. Not fear. Not yet. Discomfort. Because repetition suggests intention. And intention suggests presence. He told himself it could still be mechanical. Something automated. Something shifting with temperature or airflow. So he stayed awake the next night, determined to listen carefully from the beginning. He turned off his lights. Lay still. Watched the digital clock beside his bed. Minutes passed. Then, precisely at 12:14 a.m., it began. Step. 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 His chest tightened slightly as he counted. 4. 5. 6. The rhythm was identical to the previous nights. Same spacing. Same weight. Same cadence. 7. 8. 9. He didn't move. 10. 11. 12. Stop. No variation. No deviation. No additional sound. Just 12 measured steps above a ceiling that should not have supported anyone walking across it. He sat up slowly and stared at the tiles again. Logic began its work immediately. Searching. Sorting. Testing explanations. Maintenance worker. Animal on the roof. Loose panel shifting in wind. All reasonable possibilities. Yet none of them aligned perfectly with what he had heard. Animals don't walk in straight lines with evenly spaced steps. Loose panels don't stop exactly after 12 movements. Wind doesn't follow a consistent nightly schedule. The mind doesn't abandon logic quickly. It defends it. Reinforces it. Rebuilds it when necessary. So he tried something else. The next night, he recorded it. Phone placed on the desk. Microphone pointed upward. Waiting. 12:14 a.m. The sound began again. 12 steps. Clear enough that he could see the audio levels rising and falling on the screen. When it stopped, he waited 5 minutes before touching the phone. His hands felt colder than before. He played the recording back. The steps were unmistakable. Measured. Heavy. Deliberate. Footsteps. Above him. Where no one should have been. This was the point where unease crossed into something deeper. Because fear rarely arrives all at once. It builds gradually, piece by piece, as each new detail removes one more explanation. And once enough explanations disappear, what remains is a question. A question the mind cannot answer. He didn't tell anyone yet. Not because he wanted to keep it secret. But because he wanted to understand it first. He wanted a reason he could say out loud without hearing how unlikely it sounded. So instead, he listened again the next night. Waiting. Watching. Counting. Knowing exactly what time it would begin. And when it did. It didn't stop at 12. When a pattern changes, the mind notices immediately. That is how awareness works. It catalogs repetition, memorizes rhythm, and recognizes deviation. The moment something breaks from expectation, attention sharpens. Muscles tense. Breathing shifts. The body prepares for information it cannot yet define. He heard it before he could count it. Step. 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 The same cadence as every night before. The same measured weight. The same deliberate pacing. But when he reached 12, the sound continued. 13. He didn't move. 14. He stared upward, eyes fixed on the ceiling grid as if watching might force an explanation to appear. 16. Then silence. He counted 30 seconds in his head. Then 60. Nothing followed. That was the first time uncertainty outweighed reason. Because repetition can be dismissed. But change requires interpretation. And interpretation demands a source. The next day, he did what most people eventually do when an experience refuses to make sense. He reported it. Not dramatically. Not urgently. Casually. The way someone mentions a dripping faucet or a flickering bulb. He visited the resident assistant. Explained that he'd been hearing footsteps above his ceiling at night. Asked if there was maintenance access or storage space overhead that someone might be using after hours. The RA listened. Nodded. Didn't laugh. That reaction mattered. Because ridicule would have ended the conversation. But acknowledgement meant the question would be investigated. They checked the building directory first. No listed attic. No upper service level. No mechanical corridor. Still, directories can be outdated. Renovations happen. Spaces get repurposed. So they pulled the building map stored in the office filing cabinet. A folded sheet of paper printed years earlier, showing floor layouts in careful black lines. They spread it across the desk. Room numbers. Stairwells. Utility closets. Electrical panels. And above the top floor. Nothing. Just the roof boundary drawn as a solid border. No space indicated between. The RA traced the area above his room with a finger, double-checking. Then checked again. Then rotated the page as if orientation might reveal something hidden. It didn't. Still, procedure required confirmation. Later that afternoon, maintenance unlocked a narrow service door at the end of the hallway. Inside was a vertical ladder leading upward. Dust coated the rungs. The air smelled stale, like a place rarely opened. He watched as the maintenance worker climbed. The ladder led to a small hatch. The hatch opened with effort, its hinges resisting from disuse. Light from a flashlight beam swept the space above. Insulation. Beams. Ductwork. No flooring. No pathway. No surface capable of supporting a person's weight. The maintenance worker shifted his angle, checking carefully. The flashlight beam moved slowly across rafters and metal piping. Dust drifted downward in soft gray strands disturbed by the motion. "There's nowhere to walk," the worker said. The hatch closed again. The ladder descended. The door locked. Investigation complete. Official conclusion: no accessible space above the ceiling. Explanation unresolved. That night, he waited differently. Before, he had listened with curiosity. Now he listened with intent. Phone ready. Recorder open. Eyes fixed on the time display. 12:14 a.m. The sound began. Step. His pulse quickened. Step. He swallowed slowly, keeping his breathing shallow so it wouldn't interfere with the recording. Step. He whispered, barely audible. "Hello." The footsteps stopped. Immediately. The silence that followed was thicker than any sound. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Seconds stretched. Then. Tap. A single, sharp knock from above. His throat tightened. He hadn't moved. Hadn't made noise beyond that one word. And yet the timing felt precise. As though the sound had responded. He stared at the ceiling tile directly over his bed. Another tap. Closer this time. Not a footstep. A different sound entirely. Smaller. Focused. Intentional. He reached slowly for the phone and kept recording. Tap. 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 The taps began moving. Not randomly. Systematically. Across the ceiling. Each contact point traveled in a line, then turned at a right angle. Then continued. Then turned again. Tracing. Mapping. Following the shape of the room. His chest rose and fell faster now, though he tried to keep his body still. His mind searched desperately for an explanation, pipes expanding, debris shifting, metal contracting, but none of those possibilities accounted for the pattern forming above him. Because whatever was making the sound seemed to know the layout. It reached the corner above his desk. Stopped. Tap. Turned. Tap. Continued along the wall line. His hands began to feel cold. The sound traveled until it reached the area above his door. Then it stopped again. Silence. He thought it was over. Then came a long, slow scraping sound. Not loud, but unmistakable. A dragging motion. As if something above the ceiling were pulling itself across the surface of the space that wasn't supposed to exist. Dust sifted down from the tiles. At first just a few grains, drifting like pale snow. Then more. Fine particles landing on his desk. His blanket. His hands. He didn't wipe them away. He watched them fall. Above him, the scraping continued, traveling the length of the room with steady pressure. The ceiling tile over his bed gave a faint downward flex. Barely visible. But enough that he saw it. Enough that he knew it had moved. The sound stopped directly overhead. Silence returned. Total. Absolute. He realized then that he had stopped breathing. Slowly, carefully, he inhaled. The air felt tight in his lungs. Minutes passed. Nothing else happened. Eventually the stillness settled back into the ordinary quiet of a dormitory at night. Distant plumbing. A door closing far down the hall. Someone coughing in another room. Normal sounds. Familiar sounds. Safe sounds. But the dust remained. And on his phone. The recording was still running. He did not listen to it right away. Because part of him already understood something he wasn't ready to confirm. That if the recording captured what he believed it had captured, then whatever had been above his ceiling hadn't just been moving. It had been listening. There is a point in prolonged fear when anticipation becomes louder than sound. It happens when the mind stops asking if something will occur, and begins waiting for where. That night, he didn't lie down because he was tired. He lay down because he wanted to test a theory. If the sounds were random, they would remain random. If they were structural, they would remain consistent. But if they were aware, they would adjust. He turned off the light and settled onto the mattress, keeping his breathing slow, steady, measured. His phone rested beside him, screen dark, recorder open. The room held that particular stillness that only exists after midnight in a building full of sleeping people. Not silence. Stillness. The difference is subtle, but important. Silence is absence. Stillness is restraint. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, a single impact above the ceiling. Heavy. Deliberate. It wasn't the light step pattern from before. This carried weight. Massachusetts intention. The sound landed directly above his chest. His throat tightened, but he didn't move. Another sound followed. A shift. Not a step. Not a scrape. A redistribution of pressure, like something adjusting its balance. The ceiling tile above him gave a faint strain, a soft internal groan from wood and fasteners reacting to force they weren't designed to bear. He felt it more than heard it. A vibration through air, through plaster, through the thin space separating his face from whatever occupied the void above. He swallowed slowly. The next sound came softer. A slow slide. Across the space above him. It moved from his chest area toward his head. He didn't need to look. He could feel the alignment. The sense of it hovering above his face settled into his awareness with terrible clarity. Then it stopped. Directly above his eyes. The ceiling creaked. A long, strained sound, like old wood bending under pressure. The tile dipped a fraction of an inch, barely visible, but enough that the shadow line shifted. He stared upward, unblinking. His breathing had gone shallow. Not intentionally. His body had simply decided oxygen should be taken quietly. Seconds passed. Then the sound changed again. A faint series of taps. Close together. Precise. He realized, with a cold clarity that settled through his ribs, that the tapping wasn't random contact. It had rhythm. Not the steady rhythm from earlier nights. This was different. Uneven. Searching. It moved slightly to the left. Tap. Back to center. Tap. Then to the right. Tap. As if mapping the exact position of his head on the pillow. His pulse hammered so loudly he was certain it could be heard above him. The thought came uninvited, it knows where I am. And the moment that thought formed, the ceiling answered. A deep, concentrated press directly overhead. Not walking. Not pacing. Leaning. The structure gave another strained creak, louder this time. Dust sifted down again, settling across his forehead, his lips, the bridge of his nose. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't dare move. Because every instinct told him the same thing. Movement would be noticed. Time stretched. 10 seconds. 20. 30. The pressure remained. Whatever was above him wasn't passing through. It wasn't crossing the room. It wasn't pacing. It was staying. Remaining fixed over his face as if observing through the barrier. The air felt heavier with each second. His chest tightened. His hands trembled slightly against the blanket, though he tried to keep them still. Then. A new sound. A slow inhale. Faint. Filtered. But unmistakable. It came from above the ceiling. His stomach dropped. Because he hadn't been imagining that part after all. The sound lingered for one final second. And then everything stopped. No footsteps. No tapping. No shifting weight. Just silence. Complete and immediate, as though whatever had been there had withdrawn all at once. He stayed frozen for several minutes after, eyes locked on the ceiling, waiting for it to resume. Waiting for confirmation that it was still there. Waiting for proof that it had left. Neither came. Eventually exhaustion overtook vigilance. His body, pushed past its limits, forced him into sleep without permission. He moved out 4 days later. Officially, he cited sleep deprivation. Noise disturbance. Academic interference. All valid. All true. He packed quickly. Didn't take time to decorate boxes or organize belongings. The room returned to its original emptiness within hours. Bare walls. Bare desk. Bare floor. Before leaving, he looked up once more at the ceiling. In daylight, it appeared ordinary. Flat. Harmless. Inactive. There were no marks. No cracks. No visible damage. Nothing that suggested anything had ever pressed down from above. He left without saying goodbye to anyone on the floor. Returned his key. Walked out into sunlight. The building stood behind him, unchanged. Windows reflecting sky. Brick exterior quiet and still. Just another residence hall. Just another structure. Just another place people slept. Years have passed since that semester. He has lived in newer buildings. Modern apartments. Places with reinforced ceilings and thick insulation and clearly documented floor plans. Places where every sound has a source. Most nights, he sleeps normally. Most nights, the world behaves the way it's supposed to. But sometimes, in the space between waking and dreaming, he hears it again. Step. 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 Measured. Even. 12 at a time. Always above him. He opens his eyes when it happens. Holds his breath. Listens. And the sound always stops the moment he becomes fully awake. As if it knows the difference. But buildings aren't the only places that remember you. There are moments in life when sound arrives before understanding. Not loud sounds. Not sudden ones. Quiet ones. The kind that slip into awareness so gently they almost feel imagined. That is how this began. With a vibration. Not dramatic. Not urgent. Just a soft, brief tremor against fabric and plastic, like a device shifting in its sleep. It happened during a final exam. The kind of exam that compresses weeks of pressure into a single room. The air heavy with concentration. Chairs aligned in perfect rows. Pens moving steadily across paper. The faint scratch of graphite, the soft turning of pages, the occasional cough someone tries to suppress. Order. Routine. Control. At the front stood the professor. Known for strict rules. Known for precision. Known for the calm, measured cadence of his voice. He was the type of instructor who didn't raise his tone, didn't repeat himself, and didn't tolerate distraction. Students respected him because he required attention. Phones were forbidden during exams. Powered off. Stored away. Out of sight. Which is why the vibration was immediately noticeable. It came from inside the student's backpack under the desk. A faint mechanical buzz against the floor tile. Short. Contained. He froze. Not because he was afraid. Because he was calculating. If the professor heard it, there would be consequences. He kept his eyes on the exam paper, forcing his hand to continue writing even as his focus shifted entirely to the bag at his feet. The room remained steady. No one reacted. The professor continued pacing slowly along the front aisle, hands clasped behind his back, shoes making soft contact with the polished floor. So he ignored it. The vibration stopped. The test resumed its quiet rhythm. 1 minute passed. Then it happened again. Longer this time. The sound was subtle, but unmistakable. A second vibration, persistent enough that he felt it through the sole of his shoe. His pulse quickened. He stared at the same line on the page without reading it. His thoughts shifted from exam questions to a single, simple question. Who would be calling me right now? He hadn't told anyone he was taking an exam. No one should have needed to reach him. And even if they had, they knew his schedule. The vibration stopped again. Silence returned. He told himself it was nothing. A wrong number. A spam call. A delayed notification. He resumed writing. Forced his attention back onto the test. Finished another paragraph. Turned a page. Continued. For a while, nothing else happened. Then, almost exactly 40 minutes into the exam, the phone vibrated a third time. Longer than before. Insistent. This time, it didn't stop immediately. It buzzed once. Paused. Buzzed again. His stomach tightened. He didn't reach for it. He couldn't. The professor had turned slightly in his direction. Not looking directly at him. But close enough that any movement toward the bag would be noticed. So he sat perfectly still. The vibration finally ceased. And with it, the feeling that something had shifted. Not in the room. Inside his awareness. Because the timing felt deliberate. Not random. Measured. As if whatever had triggered the call understood exactly when it would be felt. When the test concluded, relief spread through the room like released pressure. Papers stacked. Pencils set down. Conversations beginning in low voices as tension dissolved. He submitted his exam, slung the backpack over his shoulder, and stepped into the hallway. That was when the phone buzzed again. This time openly. Aloud. He pulled it out. One missed call. No caller ID. And one voicemail. Recorded while he had still been sitting in the exam room. He frowned slightly, irritation mixing with curiosity. Most voicemails were predictable, telemarketers, wrong numbers, automated messages. He tapped play. A second of static filled his earbuds. Then a voice spoke. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. It was the professor. Clear. Precise. Close enough that it sounded as if you were standing beside him. And if you're unsure, remember that stress responses are learned, not instinctive. So don't overthink it. Just answer what you know. He stopped walking. His body reacted before his mind caught up. A sudden hollow drop in his chest. A tightening in his throat. Because he recognized the sentence. Not vaguely. Exactly. Those were the precise words the professor had spoken aloud during the exam when a student in the front row had raised a hand and asked a question. The professor had responded in that same steady tone, offering reassurance without breaking formality. He remembered hearing it. Remembered the moment clearly. Remembered thinking the sentence had helped calm him. And yet, the voicemail timestamp proved something impossible. The message had been recorded before the professor said it. He checked again. Time received, 10:18 a.m. The professor had spoken that sentence at approximately 10:30. 12 minutes later. His fingers felt colder against the phone screen. He replayed the message. Static. Then the voice again. Same tone. Same phrasing. Same background sounds. This time he noticed details he hadn't caught before. The faint rustle of papers. A chair shifting. A cough from somewhere behind him. Ambient noises from inside the exam hall. Not a recording from another day. Not a saved lecture clip. This had been captured inside that room. Before it happened. The mind has a reflex when confronted with something that doesn't fit its framework. It searches for error. Maybe the timestamp was wrong. Maybe the phone clock had changed. Maybe the voicemail server had delayed delivery. Maybe someone had edited audio as a prank. Maybe memory itself was mistaken. He checked the phone clock. Accurate. Checked the call log. Consistent. Checked the date. Correct. Each verification removed another possible explanation. And with every explanation removed, the message remained. Intact. Waiting. He turned back toward the lecture hall. The door was still open. The professor stood at the podium gathering papers into a neat stack. The student approached and spoke casually, asking if the professor had tried calling him during the exam. The professor looked confused. Said he didn't even have his number. Said he would never make calls during a test. The student hesitated. Then played the voicemail aloud. The professor listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't speak. When it ended, his expression had changed. Not dramatically. Just slightly. A tightening near the eyes. A stillness in his posture. He cleared his throat. Said it must be a technical anomaly. Some kind of signal interference. Suggested contacting the phone carrier. Then he gathered the rest of his papers and dismissed the conversation. Professional. Controlled. But his voice carried something new. Something thinner. That night, the student replayed the voicemail again. And again. Each time, the same words. Same tone. Same quiet background sounds. But on the fourth listen, he noticed something else. Underneath the professor's voice. Another sound. Faint. Rhythmic. Almost too soft to detect. Like breathing. Someone else's. Steady. Close to the microphone. As if whoever recorded the message had been standing right beside the phone. Listening. And that was only the first message. Not the professor's. Proof changes everything. Before proof, the mind debates. After proof, it adapts. What unsettled him most was not the voice. Not the words. Not even the timestamp. It was the background. Because background sound is difficult to fake convincingly. It contains irregularities, spatial cues, acoustic signatures unique to a location. Experts who analyze recordings often begin there, not with speech, but with environment. The subtle reflections of sound waves off walls. The distance between a cough and a microphone. The shape of a room revealed through echo. He listened again, this time with attention trained on everything except the professor's voice. There it was. Paper shifting. Fabric brushing against a desk. A chair leg adjusting its weight. Every detail matched the lecture hall precisely. The acoustics were identical to what he remembered hearing during the exam. The reverberation length. The faint hollow quality of sound reflecting off tiered seating. Even the directionality of background noise aligned with where people had been sitting. It wasn't similar. It was exact. Which meant the recording hadn't merely captured the professor's voice. It had captured the room. And it had done so before the moment occurred. When he returned to the lecture hall and played the voicemail for the professor, the reaction was subtle enough that many people might have missed it. The professor didn't recoil. Didn't question him aggressively. Didn't accuse him of editing audio. Instead, he listened very carefully. His posture changed almost imperceptibly. Shoulders slightly rigid. Head tilted a fraction closer to the speaker. His eyes focused not on the student, but on the phone itself. When the message ended, he didn't speak immediately. That silence mattered. Because trained communicators, lecturers, instructors, public speakers, rarely pause unless something interrupts their internal rhythm. He asked to hear it again. The student replayed it. Again, the professor listened. Still. Attentive. Measuring. By the time it finished a second time, the professor's expression had altered in a way the student couldn't fully articulate. Not fear. Not disbelief. Something quieter. More analytical. Like recognition. He cleared his throat and offered an explanation about signal interference. Said recordings could occasionally capture nearby transmissions. Mentioned rare technical anomalies. His tone remained professional. Controlled. But his hands were no longer perfectly steady. He gathered his papers faster than before. Stacked them with less precision. Slid them into his briefcase without aligning the corners. Small details. Yet telling ones. Because composure often reveals itself most clearly when it falters. That night, the phone buzzed again. He had been expecting it. Expectation changes fear. It replaces surprise with dread. He stared at the screen before touching it. One missed call. Unknown number. One voicemail. His hand hesitated before pressing play. Static. Then a voice. His voice. Soft. Tired. Speaking quietly. I don't think this is possible, but it keeps happening. The recording ended. He lowered the phone slowly. The room around him was silent. No sound except his breathing. Then, without meaning to, he whispered the exact same sentence aloud. Word for word. Same tone. Same cadence. Same pause before the last phrase. The moment the final word left his mouth, the realization hit him with full force. The voicemail hadn't predicted what he might say. It had documented what he was going to say. Precisely. The messages continued. At first, minutes ahead. Then longer. One arrived 40 minutes early containing a snippet of conversation he would later have with a classmate about an assignment. Another came hours before he spoke to his sister on the phone. The voicemail contained his side of the conversation exactly as it would unfold later that evening, including a joke he hadn't thought of yet. He began testing it. He tried changing what he planned to say. The message adjusted. He tried remaining silent. The message contained silence. He tried speaking randomly. The message matched the randomness perfectly. Each attempt removed another layer of autonomy. Because every experiment confirmed the same thing. The voice arriving in advance was never wrong. Time is more than measurement. It is structure. It provides sequence. Cause followed by effect. Action followed by consequence. Decision followed by result. Remove that order. And identity begins to erode. Psychologists who study temporal perception describe a person's sense of self as partly anchored in linear progression. Past informs present. Present shapes future. The continuity between them creates the feeling of being a single, consistent individual moving forward through life. But in his case, the sequence had reversed. Future arrived first. Present followed. And choice began to feel like imitation. Because how can someone claim ownership of a decision if they already know they're going to make it? He stopped making plans. Stopped finishing sentences in his head. Stopped rehearsing conversations. He tried to think as little as possible about what he might say or do next. Because every prediction felt dangerous. Every intention felt monitored. Sleep became difficult. Not because of noise. Because of anticipation. He began to dread the vibration of his phone the way people dread alarms signaling bad news. The sound itself was quiet, but it carried information he wasn't ready to hear. One night, the phone buzzed while it lay beside him on the desk. He didn't pick it up. Didn't look. He just stared at it. It buzzed again. And again. Finally, slowly, he turned the screen toward himself. One new voicemail. Timestamp, 9 seconds ahead. He watched the seconds tick forward on the clock. 9. 8. 7. His chest tightened. 6. 5. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. 4. 3. His pulse pounded in his ears. 2. 1. The timer reached 0. He pressed play. Static. Then his voice, barely audible. Please stop. The audio ended. He hadn't spoken yet. His throat felt dry. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, involuntarily, quietly, he whispered. Please stop. The messages didn't just predict his words. They began to decide them. At first, the messages had sounded like interruptions. By this point, they felt like instructions. The shift from curiosity to fear rarely happens all at once. It happens through confirmation. Through repetition. Through patterns that refuse to break. By the time the next voicemail arrived, he had already stopped telling himself it was coincidence. He no longer searched for technical explanations. No longer checked signal bars. No longer refreshed timestamps hoping they would correct themselves. Instead, he prepared. Because he understood something essential. Whatever was sending the messages was not guessing. It knew. The recording that changed everything arrived in the early afternoon while he sat alone at his desk. No exam. No lecture. No conversation. Just silence. He didn't press play immediately. He waited. Watched the seconds pass. When the timestamp finally aligned with the present moment, only then did he tap the screen. Static. Then his voice. Calm. Neutral. Reading aloud the exact sentence printed on the open textbook in front of him. The sentence he had been staring at, but hadn't read yet. His eyes lowered slowly to the page. The words were there. Exactly as spoken in the message. He swallowed. And quietly, almost automatically, he read the line out loud. Same cadence. Same tone. Same pauses. The recording had not predicted what he might say. It had predicted what he would say, once he heard himself say it first. After that, the boundary dissolved. Future messages no longer felt separate from him. They felt connected. Like echoes traveling backward instead of forward. One voicemail contained the sound of him dropping a glass in the kitchen. Another contained his apology during a phone call he hadn't made yet. One captured a laugh he didn't recognize until hours later when a friend told a joke. Each message proved the same point. Events didn't just resemble the recordings. They matched perfectly. Which left him with a question he could never answer. Was he living his life? Or replaying it? He began documenting everything. Time received. Time heard. Time event occurred. He mapped patterns. Compared intervals. Measured gaps between message and reality. But analysis brought no clarity. Because there was no pattern. Some recordings arrived hours early. Others seconds. One appeared nearly a full day in advance. The only constant was accuracy. Absolute. Unwavering. Unforgiving. Then came the message that didn't belong to him. It arrived late. Later than most. The screen lit the room with a pale rectangle of light. Unknown number. No caller ID. For the first time. It wasn't from the future. It was from now. He pressed play. Static filled the speaker. Then a voice he recognized instantly. Professor Caldwell. But different. Older. Strained. Quieter than before. If you're hearing this, you need to stop checking the messages. A faint shifting sound. Like fabric brushing against something hard. Then. The recording cut off. No click. No background noise. Just silence. The next day, the professor wasn't in class. At first, no one thought much of it. Professors cancel lectures sometimes. Conferences. Illness. Emergencies. But the day after that, his office door was locked. The nameplate was gone. Not removed carelessly. Removed cleanly. As if it had never been there. Students who asked the department office received polite, brief responses. He was no longer teaching. No explanation given. No forwarding contact. No official announcement. Within a week, his name had disappeared from the faculty directory entirely. Digital traces erased with administrative efficiency. Schedules updated. Courses reassigned. It was as though the institution had corrected an error. Not removed a person. After that message, the voicemails stopped. No calls. No alerts. No vibrations in the night. The silence should have brought relief. Instead, it brought something worse. Absence. Because he no longer knew whether the messages had ended. Or simply decided they didn't need to arrive early anymore. Time passed. Weeks. Months. He kept the phone. Same device. Same number. Same settings. He never changed it. Not because he wanted the messages to return. But because part of him believed changing anything might cause them to. Life continued. Classes. Work. Conversations. Normalcy resumed on the surface. Yet one reflex never faded. Whenever his phone vibrated. His breath still caught. His hand still hesitated. And for a fraction of a second. He always wondered whether the sound meant someone was calling him. Or whether it meant something already knew what he was about to say. But some voices don't need time to reach you. They only need you to answer. Most campus buildings fall silent long before midnight. Not because they're empty. Because everyone assumes they are. College life runs on patterns. Morning alarms. Afternoon lectures. Late night studying. Students adjust to noise the way sailors adjust to waves. Doors slam. Music leaks through walls. Laughter echoes down corridors. None of it feels unusual. But when those sounds stop, silence becomes noticeable. And once silence becomes noticeable, every sound inside it matters. She was known among her friends as the one who stayed awake after everyone else logged off. Assignments, research, videos, reading, her nights stretched long past the hours most people considered reasonable. Night owls rarely think of themselves as vulnerable. They think of themselves as observant. Because when others sleep, they're the ones awake to notice what changes. Her roommate, Erin, had the opposite rhythm. Early mornings. Early classes. Early shifts at a cafe across campus. By midnight, Erin was almost always asleep, her breathing slow and steady in the dark. This difference created a routine neither of them questioned. At 2 a.m., one slept. One didn't. That night began like any other. She realized she had no clean clothes for the next day. A small inconvenience. A normal problem. The kind of thing students handle without thinking. Laundry. A simple errand. Routine. Predictable. Safe. She gathered her basket, slipped on shoes, and stepped into the hallway. Dorm hallways at night feel different than they do during the day. In daylight, they belong to movement. At night, they belong to stillness. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed faintly, a sound most people ignore until there's nothing else left to hear. The air carried that familiar institutional scent, detergent, old carpet, faint dust trapped in vents. Her footsteps sounded louder than they should have. Not because they were loud. Because nothing competed with them. The basement staircase absorbed sound. Each step down seemed to dull the world above. Voices faded. Air shifted. The building's warmth thinned into a cooler layer that lingered near the lower floors. By the time she reached the bottom, the silence felt thicker. Not hostile. Just present. During the day, the laundry room was cramped and noisy. Machines rattled. Students talked. Timers beeped. At night, it felt like a space paused between uses. The lights cast a flat glow that didn't quite reach the corners. Shadows gathered behind machines and along the edges of the walls where dust collected in thin gray lines. The washers hummed unevenly. The dryers thumped softly. Pipes whispered inside the ceiling. Mechanical sounds. Explainable sounds. Comforting sounds. She hesitated at the bottom of the stairs for only a moment before walking in. She loaded her clothes into a washer near the back. The metal drum smelled faintly of detergent and something older underneath. She poured soap, closed the lid, pressed start. Water began to rush in. A normal sound. She leaned against a folding table and checked her phone while the machine filled. Minutes passed. Nothing unusual. Just machines. Just pipes. Just night. Then she heard her name. Not loud. Not whispered. Spoken at a normal volume from somewhere near the dryers. Her first reaction wasn't fear. It was relief. Because hearing a familiar voice in a quiet place makes the world feel populated again. She recognized it immediately. Erin. Her roommate. She called back casually, asking what Erin was doing down there so late. No answer. The machines continued their steady rhythm. Then the voice came again. Her name. Clearer this time. Followed by a request. Can you help me? The tone sounded wrong. Not frightened. Not rushed. Careful. Measured. As if each word were being selected deliberately before it was spoken. She stepped forward, expecting to see her roommate crouched beside a machine. Maybe stuck zipper. Maybe jammed door. Maybe spilled detergent. Normal problems. Dorm problems. Explainable problems. The light seemed dimmer toward the back. Not actually dimmer. Just farther from the fixtures. Shadows gathered in the narrow gaps between dryers. For a second, she thought she saw movement there. A slight shift. Like someone adjusting their balance. She asked what was wrong. "Come here. I can't move." The sentence matched perfectly. Same pitch. Same pacing. Same inflection. Exactly the same as before. That repetition mattered. Human speech is rarely identical twice. Even rehearsed lines change subtly. Tone shifts. Timing alters. Breath falls in different places. But this was precise. Mechanical in its consistency. Her chest tightened. Because she realized something before she consciously formed the thought. Aaron joked a lot. Aaron teased. Aaron improvised. Aaron never sounded rehearsed. She stopped walking. Pulled out her phone. Opened her contacts. Tapped Aaron's name. The call icon appeared. Before she could lift the phone to her ear. It rang. From her pocket. She froze. The voice near the dryers went silent. The vibration continued. Her hand moved slowly. Carefully. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the phone. Aaron's name glowed on the screen. Incoming call. She answered. Her voice barely above a whisper. She asked where Aaron was. On the other end, her roommate sounded groggy. Confused. Half asleep. She said she was in bed. In their room. Upstairs. As the real Aaron spoke through the phone. The space between the dryers remained motionless. No footsteps. No breathing. No shifting shadows. Nothing. Just machines. Just pipes. Just night. She didn't explain what she'd heard. Didn't ask her roommate to come downstairs. Didn't investigate further. She simply backed away. One step. Then another. Never turning her back on the dark gap between the machines. Because instinct had already reached a conclusion her mind hadn't yet accepted. Voices can travel through vents. Through walls. Through pipes. But sometimes. They travel through something else. She reached the stairs. Placed one foot on the first step. And that's when she heard it again. Softer now. Further away. Her name. Spoken with quiet patience. Like someone willing to wait. The moment you realize the familiar can be unfamiliar is not immediate. It creeps in. That night, she felt it first in the small vibration against her leg. Her phone. In her pocket. The signal of another life, another presence, in the dark. The display said Aaron. Her roommate. Upstairs. Safe. Asleep. Yet the voice spoke from the laundry room again. The same calm, measured tone. Repeating the same phrase. I can't move. Come help me. The repetition made the message impossible to ignore. Her mind raced through rational explanations, echoes, prank calls, stress, but each one fell away, piece by piece, until only one truth remained: the voice was here. And it was deliberate. Instinct forced her retreat. Step by step, away from the machines. The voice followed. Her name. Spoken again, softer this time, but unmistakably there. Disappointed. It was as if the tone contained expectation that she would cross the threshold it had set, obey the silent command of repetition. No threat. No violence. Just, waiting. And the waiting was patient enough to unsettle. In the light of day, evidence becomes almost mundane. The dryer near the back, one she had avoided at night, bore a dented inward door. A faded sign warned students to leave it sealed. The resident assistant confirmed it. This machine had been broken for years. Even when it wasn't running, it made sounds. Sometimes loud, sometimes subtle. But at night, when the building was quiet, those sounds became something else. Something that could imitate a voice. Something that could remember patterns. Something that could wait. And weeks later, the anomaly repeated. This time, Aaron, the roommate, heard the voice. Calling again from the same corner between the machines. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. Imitating her friend's tone with uncanny precision. No human was there. No explanation could account for the presence, the consistency, the patience. They moved out at the end of the semester. Forced by schedules, by routine, by the unnerving persistence of presence. Yet even then, she would later report, late at night in quiet spaces, the name echoed softly through empty rooms. No pattern. No schedule. Just occasional reminders. That someone, or something, remembered. Looking back across these events, certain patterns emerge. Each phenomenon targets awareness. No physical attacks. No sudden confrontations. Just observation. Each one adapts to the person it follows. Learns them. The pace of steps, the phrasing of a voice, the exact timing of interaction, all of it tailored to capture attention, to provoke response. It isn't the building that's dangerous. It isn't the broken machine, the phone, the dark corner. It is the awareness itself. Because once something learns you, it remembers. And when it does, even silence is a message. The danger wasn't that something was there. It was that something was paying attention. Campuses are meant to be familiar. Predictable. Lecture halls, dorm rooms, laundry rooms, libraries, they exist on schedules, routines, and expectation. Yet these three stories, separate in time and place, share a single thread, awareness. Each begins with a mundane choice, a cheap dorm, a late-night study session, a walk to the laundry room. Ordinary actions in spaces that feel safe. And yet, safety proved to be conditional. Fragile. Because it isn't the walls or the ceilings themselves that make a space uneasy. It's how those spaces carry attention, shape perception, and respond to expectation. Consider the architecture. Old dorms with high ceilings, narrow stairwells, walls that carry sound. Empty lecture halls with hard floors and long sight lines. Basement laundry rooms, with humming machines, ductwork, and shadowed corners. Each setting acts as an amplifier. Not of sound alone, but of presence. Noise, when isolated, is harmless. But repeated patterns, footsteps, dragging, tapping, speak to something deeper in the mind. Our brains are wired to detect patterns, anticipate motion, and assign agency. It is a survival instinct. And in these cases, that instinct becomes a conduit for fear. Across all three accounts, the phenomenon begins quietly, almost politely. A sound out of place. A vibration. A familiar voice where it should not be. The first reaction is disbelief. Rationality asserts itself. Pipes. Old floors. Fatigue. Coincidence. Logic, however, begins to fray when patterns repeat. When footsteps follow an exact number of steps. When voices speak words that will be spoken in the future. When the broken dryer, sealed for years, suddenly becomes the source of recognition. Fear begins not with confrontation, but with comprehension failing to keep pace with observation. Across the three stories, the danger is consistent. Not presence, but attention. Not harm, but awareness. Every sound, every vibration, every voice carries a lesson. The moment you are observed, your patterns, your routines, your reactions, your very self, can be learned. And once learned, nothing about your life feels private. Nothing feels safe. The final takeaway is subtle, but unnerving. Buildings, objects, even voices remember. They do not forget. They do not need a face, a motive, or a body. They only need you to respond. To listen. To acknowledge. Because that is how awareness spreads. And once it spreads, it does not rest. It waits. And it always remembers. The question is no longer whether something is there. The question is whether it has been watching you all along.